Truman Capote, who didn't summer in the Hamptons, he autumned and wintered there, once referred to his home in the Hamptons on Sagaponack as Kansas with a sea breeze. He had done his writing for In Cold Blood in Kansas, and so was familiar with the state. Let's take a look at Capote's Hamptons cottage. In 1976, the writer Truman Capote gave Architectural Digest's Rosemary Kent the tour of his abode on Daniels Lane, showing off his Spartan bedchamber, a cloyingly consistent use of unfinished wood, and of course his writing desk. The house, he told Architectural Digest, was built by a carpenter who's dead now, which is somehow suitable for a man whose work was always blithely tainted by the macabre. Even his reputation as both socialite and recluse is encapsulated in the cottage, though his house was just blocks away from the homes of James Jones, Willem de Kooning, Gene Stafford, and Kurt Vonnegut. Capote reportedly shied away from their company. They were known as the SAG main set. He told Architectural Digest that in the past 14 years since I've had this house, I've gone out 6 times for dinner. Was this another one of Capote's tall tales? Capote moved into the house shortly after the release of the 1961 film version of Breakfast at Tiffany's, and spent much of his time there writing in the mornings. He completed In Cold Blood there. He would venture into town around lunchtime, run errands, and often drive over to historian Robert Keene's bookstore, and then to Gloria Vanderbilt's residence to take a swim in her pool, whether or not she was home at the time. In the evenings, Capote was a familiar face on the Hamptons social scene, attending parties and spending time with his swans, such as socialite Lee Radziwill and former Interview magazine editor Bob Calaculo. Gerald Clark, the executor of Mr. Capote's estate, told Dan's Hamptons, "Of course Truman was invited out, but he also used this home as a retreat. Truman would wander around in shorts and not cater to anyone in particular. He loved it because it was not Manhattan. It was not a pretentious sort of place. You could hear the roar of the ocean 200 yards away from the screened-in porch. There was a different sort of society out here then, and it was so much quieter. Who's out here now? Rock stars, movie stars? It's a publicity society. Who knows, if he were still alive today, he might have been at the center of P. Diddy's latest party, making little asides, taking it all in. But of course he might not have been." According to Mr. Clark, the author decorated the 2-story home himself, with wicker furniture in the study, blue boat deck paint on the floors, and a stark red and white bedroom with a simple bed and table. "For me, it's a bore to use a decorator. I just don't care to have someone come in and tell me what I need to live with. I know," Mr. Capote once said in his high-pitched southern voice. Mr. Bleckner, the subsequent owner, restored the home, enlarged the main house to 2,000 square feet, and added a 1,900 square foot studio, a 2-bedroom guest house, an outdoor pool, and garage, thus destroying some of the humble magic of the place. A man of the rural South, Capote told Architectural Digest during the 1976 visit that the neighborhood in the Hamptons reminds him of home. Unlike the city dwellers who trekked out to the Hamptons for summertime socializing, Capote went out to work, alone, leaving his lover, Jack Dunphy, behind in New York City. You can learn more about Dunphy and Capote in their video on this channel. As their 35-year relationship moved forward, it became non-exclusive, and Capote became addicted to drugs. Did Capote bring any lovers to his Hamptons cottage? He did engage in a relationship with a married Long Island man after his 1975 tell-all La Côte Basque, and back in 1966, he brought his collaborator Harper Lee to his cottage for some rest and relaxation. The famed author's connections to the locales of his 2 New York residences, like the inspirations between his two most acclaimed works, Breakfast at Tiffany's and In Cold Blood, similarly straddle the dynamics of city socialites and rural life. By age 23, he had published his first novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms, making a name for himself thanks to his extreme talent. His short stories are among the finest America has produced, and I highly recommend them. He relayed the stories of young, confused gigolos in New York City, as well as stories of Thanksgiving and Christmas in rural Alabama. The mainstream didn't know what to do with Truman Capote, offensive on one hand by his overt homosexuality, and on the other by his overt southernness. He tried LSD and got hooked on alcohol. His LSD use coincides with its use by many authors. Aldous Huxley, for example, tried it in an attempt to try to recapture a childhood memory. It's not known if Capote tried it for the same reasons. Capote told far-fetched tales as well. His voice was too high, he was too shy, he wanted Marilyn for breakfast at Tiffany's and got Audrey, so on and so forth. Even today, documentaries in the wake of Feud Season 2 focus on his high society swans instead of the tragic blonde southern boy who called orange juice and vodka orange drink. The anti-South sentiment of the so-called coastal elite play more of a role here than many like to admit. Capote was not the first Southerner to turn New York City society on its head. Ward McAllister did it a century before. With the success of his first novel, Capote was able to dive into the delights of fame, all the while fueling his creative engine. The setting and main character of Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany's take inspiration from the places and people he encountered living and socializing in New York City during the 1950s, including his lover's ex-wife. It is said that Capote lived in Brooklyn Heights while he wrote the famous film-adapted 1959 novella. He also vacationed on Long Island during that time too, more specifically on Fire Island, where his lover's ex-wife Joan McCracken would later settle. It is believed that Capote wrote the beloved classic during the summer of 1957 at the iconic Carrington House in Cherry Grove. This famous estate, frequented by celebrities, artists, and historic gay figures, was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2016. And in 2022, it was redeveloped by the National Park Service on the taxpayer dime, indicated the preferred status given to homosexuals over heterosexual history under the Biden administration. Perhaps this estate inspired him to build his Sagaponack estate in 1962, but it's far more likely that this two-room cottage was inspired by the architecture of the South. Many cabins in Alabama only have 2 rooms, with cooking occurring outdoors. Capote's 2-story living room communicated a mood of oceanside ease tinged with intelligence and humor. Highly personal objects, memorabilia, and books, which included copies of his own works in several languages, were placed casually among the simple furnishings. The type of cottage built is known as a saltbox, and it reflects the 2-room cottages of rural Alabama. On the market for $14.6 million and then $15 million in 2008, it cost Capote under $100,000 to build in 1961. The unpretentious exterior of the flat-roofed, box-shaped studio beach house, perhaps reflecting the designs focusing on gardens in traditional Alabama architecture, was surrounded by sun-baked trees, weathered and timeless. Capote's bedroom was a Spartan statement and sexy in its red and white theme. Miniature wood chests of drawers and a gilt-framed mirror rested on wall ledges above his single-iron bedstead. Besides the bed were detective magazines on a card table and a floor lamp for reading before falling asleep. Capote also created a witchcraft altar, as he called it, on a small set of steps in the living room. The altar displayed an array of accoutrements, including an antique wood cat baring its fangs and arching its back, a bronze bell, perhaps for summoning something, and a Cocteau-designed needlepoint mask pillow. Statues of cats and lions were common around the cabin. Pillows stitched by Capote's childhood friend, Miss Sook, also appear throughout the cottage. The living room's expansive shelving extended to the upper level gallery, which was reached by way of a steel spiral staircase in black. The drawing among the books is, or was, a pencil portrait of the author. Wicker furniture beneath the windows offered views of the Hamptons landscape. In a brightly painted and comfortably arranged setting in the living room, the author wrote at his wicker round table. A pair of loose yellow unrolled sphinx paper, some notebooks, a photograph of Capote, and his glasses shared the space with an open copy of In Cold Blood. Mr. Capote resided in the Sagaponack home, which sat on 4 acres near the beach for 23 years prior to his death in 1984. He bequeathed the property to his partner Jack Dunphy. When Dunphy died in 1992, the house was passed on to the Nature Conservancy, which then sold it to modern art artist Ross Bleckner in 1993 for $800,000. Truman would also go on to buy a house in Palm Beach before he died, on the West Coast, where he said his IQ dropped every time he visited. It was in California that he died, but his ashes were scattered right back in New York, indicating the love he had for its landscape.